The chain screamed against the floor of the transport van before the tires ever stopped moving. I felt it in my molars first, that low vibration, wrong, too heavy for a man. Then the smell hit. Wet fur and copper and something underneath it, something scorched like a forest struck by lightning. My partner's flashlight beam shook so hard it carved white streaks across the van's steel walls. "Don't look at him," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to my partner or to myself. Behind the reinforced grate, a shape unfolded from the shadows. Too tall, too patient. 12 deputies had refused this transfer. 3 had quit the department the week the assignment was announced. I understood why the moment his eyes opened, amber and unblinking, and he smiled at me like he already knew my name, my house, the sound my daughter made when she laughed. "You're not taking me anywhere," he whispered. "You're bringing me home." Before we go further into this one, if you're new here, welcome to The Fire. This channel exists for stories like this one, the ones passed down in low voices, the ones that don't let you sleep easy after the lights go out. If this story pulls you in, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what country and city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. All right, pull up a chair, get comfortable, and let's begin. My name is Daniel Reyes, and for 11 years, I worked prisoner transport for the county sheriff's department. It was not glamorous work. Mostly it meant long highway stretches, gas station coffee, and men in cuffs who talked too much or not at all. I liked the quiet ones. I liked routine. Routine kept me alive. I had a wife, Carla, and a daughter, Sophia, 7 years old, who thought my job meant I drove a big bus for bad guys, and that was close enough to true that I never corrected her. We lived in a small house outside town, the kind with a crooked mailbox and a dog that barked at nothing. It was an ordinary life, and I had fought hard for ordinary. My own childhood had been anything but. A father who drank, a mother who left, foster homes that blurred together like rain on a windshield. Ordinary was the thing I had built with my own hands, plank by plank, and I guarded it fiercely. The night everything changed, I was called in for what my supervisor, Sergeant Holloway, described as a high-priority special transfer. That phrase alone should have warned me. In 11 years, I had never heard it used. "Federal request," Holloway said, sliding a folder across his desk without quite meeting my eyes. "Prisoners being moved from the state facility to a black site holding center 2 hours north. They want 2 men on it, you and Marcus." Marcus Webb was my usual partner. Steady, quiet, the kind of man who'd once talked a suicidal inmate down through a locked door for 4 hours without raising his voice. If anyone could handle a difficult transfer, it was him. "What's the prisoner's classification?" I asked. Holloway hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. Just drive the route they give you. Don't stop. Don't open the back for any reason. Not water, not food, not a bathroom break. You get to the facility, you hand him off, you go home. I should have asked more questions. I didn't, because in 11 years, the job had taught me that some assignments were better left unexamined. I told myself it was just another transfer. I told myself a lot of things that night that turned out to be lies. We picked up the prisoner at 11 p.m. from a facility I didn't recognize, tucked behind an unmarked gate an hour outside the city. No press, no paperwork trail I could see, just 2 guards in unmarked uniforms who wouldn't give their names. They walked him out already restrained, not with standard cuffs, but with something heavier. A full-body harness of blackened steel that looked more suited to transporting an animal than a man. He was tall. Unnervingly tall, with a stillness that made my skin prickle before he'd said a single word. His eyes found mine across the yard, and something in my chest went cold, an animal recognition that bypassed thought entirely. I have transported murderers, arsonists, men who did things I will not describe here. None of them ever looked at me the way this man did, patient, amused, like I was a door he already had the key to. "Reyes," Marcus muttered beside me. "You feel that?" I did. I just didn't have a name for it yet. The guards loaded him into our van without a word of explanation, sealed the rear compartment with a triple lock system I'd never seen department-issued equipment use, and one of them finally spoke as he stepped back. "Whatever you hear back there," he said, "don't stop the van. Whatever he says to you, it's not true. He'll try to get inside your head before he tries anything else." Inside my head, how? I asked. The guard didn't answer. He just closed the gate behind us and walked away fast, the way you walk away from something. You're relieved is no longer your responsibility. We drove into the dark. Mile markers ticking past in the headlights. The radio humming static because we'd lost signal somewhere past the county line. For the first 40 minutes, there was nothing. Silence from the back. I started to think maybe this was overblown. Maybe fear had just made a strange man seem stranger. Then he spoke, and his voice was calm in a way that made the calm itself frightening. "Daniel," he said, and I felt my stomach drop because I had not given him my name. "How is Sophia's cough? Still bad at night?" My daughter had been sick for 3 days. Nobody outside my house knew that. Marcus's hand went to his sidearm. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white, and I did not answer because the guard's warning was already ringing in my ears. Whatever he says to you, it's not true. But some part of me, the part that had spent a childhood learning to fear men who smile before they hurt you, already knew this transfer was not what it had been described as. I did not yet know the word for what rode in the back of my van. I would learn it before the night was through, and the word would follow me for the rest of my life. The van hit something in the road at 1:47 a.m. I remember the time because it froze on the dashboard clock the instant the front left tire blew. We hadn't seen it coming. No deer, no debris, nothing in the headlights except empty asphalt, and then, impossibly, a shape that wasn't there and then was. Low to the ground and fast gone before the tire shredded, and the van lurched sideways into the guardrail. Marcus's head cracked against the window. My seat belt bit into my ribs hard enough to bruise. The engine screamed and died. For a moment there was only silence and the tick of the cooling engine. "Marcus." I shook his shoulder. He groaned, alive, blood, a shallow cut along his hairline, but conscious. "Marcus, stay with me." Behind us, the reinforced compartment groaned, not from the crash, from something shifting its weight, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. I should have called it in. I should have sat there with the doors locked and waited for backup that would take 40 minutes to arrive on a dead country road. Instead, some old instinct, the same one that used to tell 7-year-old Daniel Reyes when his father's footsteps meant trouble, pulled me out of the driver's seat to check the damage, flashlight shaking in my grip. That was my mistake. Standing outside the van in the open dark, I heard it before I understood what it meant. The triple lock system on the rear compartment disengaging, one bolt at a time, from the inside. "That's not possible," I whispered. "If this story's grabbing you by the throat as I hope, leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments of which country and city you are watching tonight." And now, the real hunt is about to begin. The rear door didn't burst open. It opened slowly, almost politely, like he wanted me to watch. And what stepped out into the moonlight was no longer a man in restraints. The blackened steel harness hung broken and useless around a frame that had changed. Taller now, wrong in its proportions, shoulders too wide, a silhouette that belonged in old fears passed down through generations rather than in a county transport van on a dead highway. His eyes caught the moonlight and held it, amber and unblinking, exactly as they had in the yard hours before. But everything else about him had become something else entirely, something with fur the color of wet ash and a stillness that made the crickets stop singing. "You crashed us," I said, because I needed to say something, needed my own voice to prove I was still standing in the world I understood. I didn't. His voice had changed too, lower, textured, like two voices speaking at once. "Something found us first. Something that's been hunting me for a very long time, Daniel. And now it's found you too." Marcus stumbled out of the passenger side, weapon drawn but lowered, held loosely at his side the way you hold a thing you know won't help. His eyes went wide, taking in the shape in front of us. And to his credit, he didn't run. He just stood beside me, breathing hard, waiting. "What are you?" Marcus managed. "I have had many names," the thing that had been our prisoner said. "The ones who locked me in that facility called me Subject 14. My mother called me Ezekiel." A pause, almost tender. "You may call me neither. You may simply listen, because we don't have long before it comes back." "Before what comes back?" He turned his head toward the tree line, toward a darkness that seemed to be holding its breath. There is a pack in these mountains older than your government, older than your roads. I was one of them once, before I broke their law, and they hunted me for it. That facility you took me from? They didn't imprison me to protect the world from me, Daniel. They imprisoned me because I was the only thing keeping the pack from finding a door back into the world your daughter sleeps in tonight. I felt the cold reach all the way into my chest. Leave my family out of this. I would like nothing more, he said, and for the first time something almost like grief moved behind those amber eyes. But they already know your name. They knew it the moment your department filed the transfer request through a system they have had eyes on for years. You didn't choose this assignment, Daniel. It chose you, the way it chooses every driver foolish enough to move me. Somewhere in the black trees, something answered. Not a howl exactly, but a low, resonant call that vibrated through the ground itself, dozens of voices layering into one sound. Marcus's face went the color of old paper. They're already here, the creature that had been our prisoner said quietly, and they are not here for me anymore. The howl faded into silence, but the silence that followed was worse, the kind that told you something was listening back. We need to move, Marcus said, already limping toward the crippled van, one hand pressed to the cut on his forehead. Radio's still got a chance if we get higher ground. The radio is how they found us, the creature said. He had settled into something closer to human again, the transformation folding back on itself in a way that made my stomach turn to watch, shoulders narrowing, the amber dimming just slightly in his eyes. I didn't ask how that was possible. I was learning fast that asking how simply cost time I didn't have. Someone gave them your route, Daniel, down to the mile marker. Packs do not find a moving vehicle in open country by scent alone. They were told exactly where to wait. Nobody knew this route except Holloway, dispatch, and the transfer paperwork, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I heard how thin they sounded. Then one of those three is not entirely what you believe them to be, he said, or one of them is being made to serve something they cannot refuse. Marcus went very still. Holloway's been with the department 11 years. I've had dinner at his house. So had I once, with people I trusted completely, and the creature said, and something old and tired moved behind his voice. That is how the pack survives, Marcus. Not by strength alone, by patience, by choosing the quiet man nobody suspects and waiting years for the right night to use him. I thought of Holloway's hesitation in his office, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes handing over that folder. Federal request. Don't ask questions. Don't stop the van. At the time, I'd read it as bureaucratic caution. Now every detail rearranged itself into something colder. There's a fire watchtower 2 miles east, I said, forcing my mind back onto solid ground, onto maps and distances, things I could still trust. Old service road gets us most of the way. If we can get to higher ground with a line of sight, I can raise dispatch directly, bypass whatever channel leaked the route. And if Holloway answers, Marcus asked quietly. I didn't have an answer for that. None of us did. We left the van where it had died, its one working headlight still burning uselessly into the trees, and started walking. The creature, Ezekiel, I made myself use the name because calling him the prisoner no longer felt honest to what he'd become to us in the space of an hour, moved through the dark like he'd been born to it, silent even in his human shape, pausing every so often to test the wind with something that was no longer quite a human gesture. They won't attack in the open yet, he said at one point, low enough that I almost missed it. They're deciding whether you're worth killing or worth using. That decision belongs to their alpha, and he does not make it quickly. Comforting, Marcus muttered. And here it gets really personal. If you are enjoying this journey, subscribe, like, and tell us below which country and city you were watching. Now comes the heaviest chapter in history. Direct confrontation. We reached the base of the service road 20 minutes later, and that was where we found the first sign that the informant theory was not just paranoia. A single vehicle sat parked at the trailhead, engine still ticking with heat, headlights dark. A department vehicle, one I recognized immediately, because I'd ridden in it 100 times. Holloway's truck. He couldn't have beaten us here, Marcus said, voice dropping to a whisper. Not unless he already knew where we'd end up. The driver's door hung open. No sign of Holloway himself, but on the seat, illuminated by my flashlight, sat a single item that turned my blood to ice. A torn page from the transfer paperwork, the exact route we'd been assigned, annotated in handwriting I recognized instantly. Small, precise, familiar from 100 incident reports. Beside the annotations, a symbol was drawn in the margin, a circle broken by 3 claw-like lines. "That's their mark," Ezekiel said quietly, reading my face rather than the page. "The mark of the one who leads them. If your sergeant drew this, he did not do it willingly, not the first time at least." "What does that mean, not the first time?" "It means," Ezekiel said, and for the first time his voice carried something close to pity, directed not at himself, but at me, "that whoever led them to your family's name has been marked long enough that the choice is no longer entirely his. We are not just hunting a traitor tonight, Daniel. We are hunting a man being worn like a coat." Somewhere above us, on the ridge overlooking the watchtower, a shape moved between the trees, upright, patient, watching. And even from this distance, I recognized the outline of a man I had trusted for 11 years. "Holloway," I called out before Marcus could stop me. The shape on the ridge tilted its head at the sound of its own name, slow and wrong. The way an animal considers a sound it does not quite understand as language anymore. We made it to the watchtower with less than a minute to spare. It was an old fire lookout, rusted metal stairs spiraling up to a single room ringed with windows, built decades ago to spot smoke on the horizon and never once designed to keep anything determined from getting inside. We barred the door with a length of pipe wedged through the handles, and Marcus killed the flashlight, plunging us into moonlit dark. 3 shapes breathing hard around a room built for 1 watchman and a radio. "That'll hold them for minutes, not hours," Ezekiel said, moving to the window, his eyes tracking movement in the tree line that I couldn't see yet, but could feel. A pressure in the air, dozens of points of attention converging on one small room. "Then we use the minutes," I said, wrestling the old radio off its mount, praying the batteries hadn't corroded through in the years since anyone had staffed this tower. Static answered me, then a thin thread of a signal, dispatch's voice fractured and distant. I gave our position, said "officer down," said "send everyone," and I don't know how much of it got through before the first body hit the tower's outer wall, hard enough to shake the windows in their frames. They came in waves, exactly as Ezekiel had warned. Not a single frontal assault, but testing pressure. A shape at one window, gone before Marcus's light found it, then another at the stairs, claws scraping metal, retreating into dark before either of us could react. They were hurting us, wearing us down, and somewhere below, directing it all with patient, terrible intelligence, was the shape that used to be my sergeant. "He's close," Ezekiel said. "I can feel him circling. The mark hasn't erased him completely. Not yet. There is still a version of your friend fighting for control somewhere underneath what they've made him." "Then help him," I said. "You said you were part of this pack once. You know how the mark works. Break it." "Breaking it requires proximity, and proximity means one of us walking out that door," Ezekiel said. And for the first time since the crash, I heard real fear in his voice. Not for himself, I understood suddenly, but for what it would cost the rest of us if he failed. Before I could argue, the pipe barring the door groaned and buckled, and Holloway's shape filled the frame. Not fully transformed, caught in some agonized middle state between the man who used to eat dinner at my kitchen table and the thing the pack had spent years quietly turning him into. His eyes found mine, and in them I saw a horrible, lucid flash of recognition. "Daniel," he rasped, voice layered wrong, fighting through gritted teeth. "Run! While I still... His body convulsed, the mark winning ground back with visible violence, and then Ezekiel moved past me before I could stop him, closing the distance, placing both hands against Holloway's chest in a gesture that looked less like combat and more like an old, sorrowful kind of prayer. "I release you from what was placed on you," Ezekiel said, and the words carried weight I felt in my own chest, old and heavy. A language underneath the English, he spoke it in. You do not belong to them. You never did." Holloway screamed, not in pain exactly, but in the particular agony of a man clawing his way back to himself after years spent buried beneath someone else's will. The symbol I'd seen scrawled in the margin of that torn page seemed to burn faintly beneath his skin before fading entirely. And then he collapsed against the door frame, human again, exhausted, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered to me, to Marcus, to 11 years of dinners and trust and a friendship the pack had worn like a mask. "I didn't have a choice, not for a long time." There wasn't time for absolution. Outside, the pressure in the air sharpened into something focused, deliberate, and through the shattered window I finally saw him, the Alpha, tall as the tree line itself, dark fur silvered by moonlight, eyes the color of old blood, watching the tower with the calm of something that had already decided how this night would end. "He's not testing us anymore," Ezekiel said quietly, helping Holloway to his feet. That was his last patience. Whatever happens next happens now. The Alpha didn't attack first. He waited, the way something ancient waits, letting the fear do half the work before he ever moved. "You brought them into this," he said, and his voice reached us without seeming to travel through the air at all, low and resonant, filling the small room like smoke. 14 years running, Ezekiel. 14 years, and still you cannot stop collecting things that do not belong to you. "They don't belong to me," Ezekiel said, stepping toward the broken door, putting his body between the Alpha and the three of us, huddled behind him. "They belong to themselves. That is the entire law you broke me for believing. A law you invented to excuse your weakness." The Alpha silhouette shifted closer, filling the doorway's outline with something too large for it. "You could have led this pack once. Instead, you chose to protect creatures who would put a bullet in you the moment they stopped being afraid." "Maybe," Ezekiel said. "Or maybe I chose to become something worth protecting them for." I understood, watching his shoulders set, what he intended to do. "Ezekiel, get Holloway and Marcus down the east stairs the second I move," he said, not looking back at me, his eyes fixed on the Alpha with a calm that felt earned rather than brave. "There's a ravine a half-mile south, too narrow for the pack to follow in numbers. Reach it, and you reach the county road. We're not leaving you." "You are," he said, and finally he looked at me just for a moment. Amber eyes holding something that felt less like a stranger's gaze and more like an old friend's goodbye. "Because I have spent 14 years running from what I am, Daniel. And tonight I finally understand what all that running was for. It was for this. For a chance to stand between something like him and someone who still gets to go home to a daughter with a cough that needs looking after." There was no time to argue further. The Alpha moved and the room dissolved into motion. Ezekiel meeting him at the threshold, the two shapes locking together in a contest that shook the old tower on its foundations. The sound of it more like a landslide than a fight, wood splintering, the whole structure groaning under weight it had never been built to hold. "Go," Marcus said, already pulling Holloway toward the east stairs. And I went, because staying would have meant dying uselessly instead of surviving usefully. And some part of me understood that honoring what Ezekiel was doing meant making sure it mattered. We ran the ravine in near total darkness, branches tearing at our clothes, Holloway stumbling with the last of his strength, the sounds of the fight behind us rising and then gradually growing distant, swallowed by trees and distance and the particular mercy of not being able to see what we couldn't have stopped anyway. We reached the county road as the first gray edge of dawn touched the horizon. 20 minutes later, headlights, 3 patrol cars, responding at last to the fragmented radio call I'd made from the tower. I told them everything I could make sound believable: an ambush, a crash, an escaped prisoner who'd saved our lives instead of taking them. Some of it they believed, some of it they simply chose not to question, the way people choose not to question things that would otherwise unmake how they understand the world. Holloway resigned 2 weeks later. He never fully explained what the marks had cost him, and I never fully asked. Some nights I still catch him staring at the tree line behind his new house, The way a man watches a door he's not sure is truly closed. Marcus and I stayed partners another 2 years before he transferred to a desk job, and neither of us ever spoke of that night on record again. As for Ezekiel, the tower was found collapsed the next morning and no remains were ever recovered from him or from what he'd fought. I chose to read that as its own kind of answer. Some debts get paid in full. Some things that save you once don't need saving back. I used to believe the worst monsters were the ones with claws and amber eyes, the ones that announce themselves in fur and moonlight. I know better now. The worst ones wear familiar faces, sit across from you at dinner, sign your paperwork, and wait years for the one night you're vulnerable enough to be useful. But I also learned something I didn't expect that night, that a monster and a man aren't always opposites. Sometimes the line between them is a choice made over and over in rooms nobody else will ever see. Ezekiel made his choice long before I ever met him, in some other dark night I'll never know the details of, and he made it again for 3 strangers in a burning watchtower who owed him nothing. I still work transport, though I request different routes now. I still think about that tower some nights, about a debt I never got to repay. Wherever he ended up, I hope he found the peace he spent 14 years running from. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next fire.